I would like to talk today about the two failures among what I call the founding fathers and one sister, because you have to include Abigail Adams. She was actually co-president with John Adams. No event in American history which was so improbable at the time has seemed so inevitable in retrospect as the American Revolution. Now, when we say the American Revolution, we ought not to just talk about the Revolutionary War. That took 6 years. That was part of it, of course. But the revolutionary generation, that is the collective thoughts and principles put forth by a number of very bright Americans in the last quarter of the 18th century, which produced the Republican form of government, which we now call democracy in a loose way. This idea was promoted by a group of people who met a lot, argued a lot. But the Revolutionary War against Britain, the war itself lasted, I would say, from April of 1775, Lexington and Concord, to the surrender of Cornwallis's British army at Yorktown in September of 1781. That was only part of it. The task of nation building took about 25 years, roughly from 1775 to 1800. It took 7 years just to get the Constitution together. That's from 1781 to 1788. So nation building, after the Constitution, consisted in, it's a chore in which we are now attempting in Iraq, but it took roughly a great deal of compromise to fighting, infighting, endless debate. The idea of a government which was controlled by the people, not by a king, was so alien. It was part of the revolutionary concept, but they had to hammer it out with a lot of argument, a lot of compromise, a lot of debate. They said, for example, who will vote? Well, will just the rich people vote, or will just the landowners vote? Or will the poor people vote? Will the women vote? Will the slaves vote? There's so much that had to be put back and forth that you see our idea of nation building, as we're trying to do now, took a long time in our own nation without the threats of terrorism that we now have. Virtually every middle school student either knows or should know, or at least has been exposed to, the founding brothers and one sister. There's less than a dozen of them. Generally, they are considered to be John Adams, Aaron Burr, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Abigail Adams, Thomas Paine, and George Washington. All of these people knew each other very well. Their lives intertwined. They frequently broke bread with one another. They sometimes argued, actually a lot they argued. They were bitterly antagonistic to one another sometimes. Together they eventually put together the Constitution of the United States. Then they propped up and they nursed that weak little infant of the new republic known as the presidency for a quarter century. They knew they were emerging heroes, so much so that they actually saved all their writings and their letters so that they'd be studied by their descendants. Some of the revolutionaries in America also talked as though they were actors in a historical drama in which the script had been written by the gods. They took themselves very seriously. Yet even among these heroic founders, as they would have said themselves, those who were present at the creation, that's the term they all used, they were two defectors. Strangely enough, two of these would-be saints did, as we might have said in college, quit before the final exam, or flunked out before the final exam. The first of the dropouts among the galaxy of heroes was Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was an unsuccessful husband, unsuccessful tobacconist, grocer, unsuccessful corset maker. Now, I don't know how exactly you become an unsuccessful corset maker, how you can tell a successful corset maker from an unsuccessful one. It stems from my unfamiliarity with corsets. But I do know that he's listed in the history books as being an unsuccessful corset maker. So he lived in London in abject poverty until he was discovered by Benjamin Franklin, who noted that he had read an awful lot of political philosophers. Franklin sponsored him in America. He only was here 2 years when he published his first pamphlet. He met Benjamin Rush on the street one day. They both talked about a new concept of independence. They both agreed that someone should write about it. Someone should write what we would call in today's industry a mission statement. Well, Benjamin Rush says, look, I'm a really big deal physician here in Philadelphia. I can't do it because even though I'm a successful physician, if it doesn't fly, I'm going to be ridden out of town. So my reputation is great. I'm 30 years old, which would make me, of course, a senior resident in today's hospital. But he said, look, I'm a big shot, so I can't do it. You do it because you're an unsuccessful corset maker, and you can be an unsuccessful corset maker anywhere. So Thomas Paine said, okay, I will write the mission statement. And he sat down and he wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. It was an urge to the patriots to commit themselves to independence. It was only 47 pages, Common Sense. Contained no real original political thinking, but it put into the minds of the patriots inspiration. Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, sold 200,000 copies. It used a phrase for the first time at the end of Common Sense. He wrote, for the first time I've ever seen in print, these words: the independent United Colonies of America. Independent. Up to that time, the patriots are thinking, look, we got our grievances with Britain, but we're not talking really independence. He says, yes, we are. We're talking about independence. It said to the patriots, our new government will not need a king. The people will govern. Everybody said, oh, come on, how can I have a government without a king? He said, no, the people will govern. It was a whole new idea. Now, you might wonder how an unsuccessful corset maker came up with these big ideas. Well, the truth is he read a lot of writers like John Locke and Hume, who had said a half a century before that it is possible to have a government which is a representative government. But it was Thomas Paine who first wrote America's mission statement. He had a profound effect on the framers of the Declaration of Independence. Well, Paine then joined Washington's army at Morristown in the winter, that bitter, dreary winter of 1777 after the raids of Princeton and Trenton, and he wrote another pamphlet. It was called The Crisis. In it, he wrote the words which are so familiar to all American school children, or should be. He wrote, these are the times that try men's souls. These are the times when the sunshine patriot and the summer soldier were shirked from his duty, but he that perseveres will win the thanks and praise of men and women for generations to come. The Army this time was flat on its back, and it was just the inspiration that they needed, the crisis. They all read it. Well, after the war, he's a successful pamphleteer by this time, Thomas Paine is, and then he gets cuckoo. He starts becoming a revolutionary. He went to London in 1787, established himself as a missionary of world revolution. He published a pamphlet called The Rights of Man, which urged the overthrow of the British monarchy. What do you think the British monarchy did? They put him in jail. Well, he eventually won bail and escaped and went to France. The British said, yeah, fine, you go. That's going to go over big in France because they got a revolution going anyway. So it becomes a big deal in France for a brief time. He's in the French Assembly. But since he didn't understand French, he didn't contribute much. But he was with the wrong party, the Girondists, and he gets thrown out of office. And pretty soon, believe it or not, Thomas Paine gets thrown in jail in France too for treason. Well, eventually he comes back to this country. And then he published another pamphlet called The Age of Reason, which has been called ever after, quote, the Atheist Bible. It was an attack on organized religion, which had roused great indignation in America. But then, here's how he really becomes the American pariah. Thomas Paine wrote a long letter when he's back in the States, which he published, accusing George Washington as being secretly a traitor who had fully intended to sell out the American cause until Benedict Arnold beat him to the punch. Well, do you think that went over like a lead balloon? Yeah. Then he also wrote a letter saying, he wrote this in a newspaper, accusing Washington of trying to make himself a king. He concluded the letter but saying that sooner George Washington dies, the better. Of course, political suicide. To criticize the greatest man of the century, who was currently president of the United States. Well, he received total ostracism in the United States. He was drinking very badly.